Okay, we are doing interviews today from the San Francisco International Book Fair, the 44th, here at 8th and Brannan. And our first interview is with one of the icons of the book trade, a guy I've known for about 150 years, maybe 130 years, I can't really tell. And Peter, could you just talk a little bit about your background, where you were brought up, family, schools, brothers, sisters, what your parents did? Give us a little thumbnail biography of your early years.
I'm simply an Army brat who had the privilege of growing up in China and Japan for 4 years before high school. I traveled. My mother moved us many times, as my father was an officer. He was during the Second World War entirely in the Pacific for 4 years. So when I came back, I went to a single high school and then, fortunately, to a single college. And I chose to go to Haverford College instead of Harvard. Very fortuitous choice, as it turned out. But I was an English graduate student and a biblical literature double major with every intention of going on to become a teacher and get a degree, PhD. I met my wife in Alaska. She was at Swarthmore, and we came out to start a life as graduate students. I had already started collecting D.H. Lawrence for Who Knows Why. I had learned also of the range of intelligence and minds and quality and differences of minds that prevailed at the levels of higher education. And by that means of triangulation, I was able to assess my own intelligence for particular purposes. For the first 2 years, I was a dutiful graduate student, and I began teaching Subject A, which was remedial English for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. And I continued building the library of a graduate student and D.H. Lawrence. And by doing that, I was in many bookstores across the country. I saw many catalogs, and I met a large number of people. And among my own colleagues teaching Subject A were another pair who were building the graduate student library also. And I quickly realized that it gave me more pleasure to have them have the books than I, because I thought they were more worthy for whatever reason, for whatever range of inferiority complex or accurate assessment of one's own abilities, which was one of my modest skills. I persevered in graduate school for 9 years and got an MA after 2 years, completed all my course requirements, everything but the PhD, and I had French to go, but I'd already done Anglo-Saxon and Old English and Middle English and German and Latin. So then I dropped out because I delighted so much in selling books to other people rather than retaining them. It was a simple matter. And during that time I learned to say yes, and I learned what a great book was. You could go a long way if you could find a great book, recognize it. And I started running after the postman to see if the AB had generated any response to any quotes in the $5 to $7.50 level. And then I had another child. And then one day I bought the contents of a bookstore sight unseen at auction. And my wife finally said, "You have to make a choice." And I chose to become a bookseller full-time. So I had an apprenticeship of at least 9 years of graduate school and 4 years of undergraduate school at the highest levels of education, which were useful and purposeful levels in my education that served me well as a bookseller. So because I could triangulate and understand any book, no matter what it was, although I was primarily a first edition dealer for many years, nonetheless I could make transpositions and realize that this book in science was, for the similar reasons, condition, edition, and so on, just as desirable as a modern first edition might be, if not to a different customer. And I had one little shop, and then I had two, and then I had 5 identical little shops.
Well, when and where was your first shop, Peter?
First shop was 1968 on Shattuck, and after 1 year I moved down the street a few blocks and had first one shop, and then 2, then 3, then 4. And
Were these all on Shattuck, Peter?
All on Shattuck. And between 1969 and 1986, I ended up with 5 shops, all at $800 a month. Or no, all at 800 square feet. Originally, each at $90 a month, and at the end, all $1,000 a month each.
Wow.
So then I was paying $5,000 a month rent. I made no store sales over the counter to students, even though I was 3 blocks from the university, let alone to faculty. So I realized that I could, with $5,000 a month, buy a building if I could find a building, and if I could make the down payment. By this time, I had bought a house in Berkeley for $27,500 in 1969, and it gradually appreciated, and I've never moved, nor have I divorced. My wife had a part-time job and became an optometry librarian for 23 years, and we raised 2 children and saw them through school. And I used the equity I had in my home for a business line of equity. And I learned to become a businessman, another essential in order to survive as a book dealer. And so I then began to apply my very few and humble qualities of being able to say yes and knowing what a good book was, and being convivial in the trade as much as possible. I joined the ABAA in 1966. I was the youngest member at the time.
How old were you?
I was 28 at that time.
Is that also when you opened up Serendipity?
No, I had not yet opened.
Okay.
Well, I founded Serendipity in '63.
Yeah.
So I had not yet moved out of my home.
Okay.
But I was very shortly an officer in the Northern California chapter. And I made the second New York Book Fair and made every one since until last year. All the Boston Book Fairs, all the California Book Fairs, all the Washington, D.C. Book Fairs, and most of the Chicago Book Fairs. And I believed utterly in the organization and its ability to help and sustain the trade, and believed that it was essential that the organization grow and be cohesive and put aside personalities when it came to problems. And for that modest insight, they made me president and put me on the board of governors and on the benevolent fund board and on the ethics committee. And during those years, I was pleased to serve the organization and watch it grow, and grow it did. Most obviously as a precursor and model and originator of the book fair as we know it, but in many other ways as well, all of which are more or less known, at least piecemeal, by all of our members.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the booksellers who influenced you, who were active when you first began, who you felt were the kinds of people that you wanted to emulate?
My mentors were very specific. They were Henry W. Wenning and Marguerite Cohn, House of Books Limited. Henry was in New Haven. Margie was in New York City. Old Oregon Bookstore. Preston McMahon was in Portland. Maxwell Hunley was in Los Angeles on Little Santa Monica Boulevard. John Swingle was in Berkeley. Warren Howell was in San Francisco. David McGee was in San Francisco. Brick Rowe was not really an influence, but he was in San Francisco, and we certainly had a relationship.
Yeah.
In fact, my employee bought his business.
Yeah.
So I was very much affected by each of these dealers in turn, and I absorbed their specific talents, some of them, or emulated them, and then went my own way as best I could, basically with the conviction that a store was essential, an open store was essential, saying yes was essential, having as many books as possible was essential, serving the customer was essential, choosing the books on behalf of the customer, not on the basis of my own inclination, was triply essential. Mm-hmm. a quality that deeply distinguishes some booksellers from others. It's not a flaw, but it does characterize many booksellers, in that many dealers will deal only in books they quote like, quote unlike, or quote unquote like. And this, of course, limits them to the books that they are themselves interested in. That's certainly not me, although I had particular interests. But I became interested swiftly in the books that my customers were interested in, or that I learned that they were interested in, and thereby I became instantly more informed than I had been. And I'm considerably at ease in dealing in Western Americana manuscripts of post office registers of money orders sent from a particular county between 1868 and 1873, or a manuscript diary, or an overland narrative, or photographs of mining in Peru, or mining in Western Australia, or mining in the Sudan, or mining in Western China, or photographs of India and the 4,000 tribal peoples that used to live in India before the nation became a state, or in literary manuscripts, or in local history, or in photography, or in art, as it comes my way. And I have bought and sold and dealt in all such things, chiefly with major libraries of the world, and with all dealers, and with such private customers as found themselves happy at Serendipity, of which there was always a decent number.
Well, you mentioned doing business with dealers. A number of dealers have told me that they would not be in business if it wasn't for you. If it wasn't for you carrying them, if it wasn't for you helping them pick out material, if it wasn't for you making suggestions as to what they should be buying, and they speak to you they speak about you almost in biblical terms as being, the person that got them where they are.
I would never want to sell a dealer a book that he would not be able to resell for profit and come back for another book. That would be as counterproductive as possible if I sold a dealer a book with which he was then stuck. I had experienced a range of attitudes from the dealers senior to me in my early days. An English dealer would not let you in the back room under any circumstances. He would not wrap your books for you. He would not supply books wrapping material for the books. He would not give you a discount. He would not get the time of day, and he would certainly not serve lunch. And he would certainly not send you away wanting you to sell his best book for a profit so that you would come back and buy another book. I was never afraid of being able to replace a good book, a unique book. It took me not too long to realize that I had a certain number of books, let's just say at the moment 500,000 items, and that left all the other items in the world that I did not own, which was, including all the other books that were in every library in the world. So there were a vast quantity of books that I did not, in fact, own. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of books. So there would be no reason why I should be afraid that I would not be able to find another book. And so there was no reason not to sell the book I had, and actually to sell it as expeditiously as possible. And that usually means for less, because the other dealer would rather pay less, or even the customer. And if he couldn't pay today, that would be all right. He could pay in 30 days, and if he needed more than 30 days, 30 days being the
standard
customary period after which someone is in arrears. The people who were most usually in arrears with me were my fellow officers in the ABAA. It was a remarkable sequence of dealers who, in fact, did not pay in 30 days. I myself tried very hard to pay at the point of purchase.
Yeah.
And I developed lines of credit with which I could develop the ability to buy books and pay for them at the point of purchase at that very moment, no matter where I was. And although I did not charge postage myself, because of course the customer pays the postage anyway, it's built into the price of the book,
right,
fairly obviously, and it's simply an insult to slap on another $4. But the truth is that it was that much more of a problem for my bookkeepers to have a separate record of postage paid and postage unpaid. It's simply another column to do double entry bookkeeping from, and it would only make their life more difficult. So it wasn't as if I was only making a gesture and not charging postage, and I certainly understand why other people need to charge postage or choose to charge postage. It's not a problem, not a moral choice, but it is an effective psychological decision for some people, and it's just simply been part of my style. It doesn't require any tremendous profundity to understand why I do it. If you're a successful bookseller, you can be kind, you can be generous, and you are automatically more powerful than almost anyone else you're dealing with, so why not be benign? If this principle applied, of course, Israel would not be slaughtering Palestinians, and the Chinese would not be slaughtering Tibetans. These are political metaphors that obtain everywhere in the world in terms of the relationships of peoples to peoples or person to person.
Talk a little bit about the Internet and what effect the Internet has had upon you and the way you do business, and how computers have entered your life, etc.
I famously said I would never use a computer, and allegedly was one of the last to convert to using a computer. But now, of course, I sit there and do nothing but work on the computer. With regard to accounting, they're a simple godsend. I use a hand crank adding machine to balance double entry columns of bookkeeping for at least 15 years, and I would never get it right for a single page until I found my error. So bookkeeping on a computer was essential. I wrote at least 50, 100-page papers in college on Corona erasable bond paper with an electric typewriter. I knew that I was going to have to write a PhD in which there was not a single typographical error. So the idea of word processing, when it finally came to me that I understood how it worked, it was such a gift from Steve Jobs or from Bill Gates or whomever, that word processing, which is what I do on a computer, and I do a lot of research on the computer by searching databases, and I've become adept at understanding many databases, many more than most people know, not all people, that I do both research and I do a lot of word processing and catalog descriptions on the computer. Consequently, I'm able to generate seriously large documents of some sort or other. The last document that I created before the computer was a William Saroyan appraisal of 100 boxes of manuscripts, and it's an $800,000 archive of 600-page description, all from 3x5 cards, and all in the wrong typeface. Because I simply didn't know how to use the computer at that time, and then when I was able to use it for the first time for my Faulkner catalog, which was a definitive bibliographical catalog of Faulkner of the best collection in the world, so it therefore became a price guide as well. I didn't know that you could have a different typeface, and the computer couldn't store enough so that I had all of it in there at any one time. It came out piecemeal and looking like crap.
Yeah.
And there was no way that I could change it. Thereafter, all of the improvements that came along in the computer, I was able to adapt as best I could. So I have been producing longer and larger and more complete documents, 200-page archive descriptions and 600-page catalogs until I stopped doing catalogs maybe 15 years ago. And in general, having the pleasure of writing up and researching any given item more efficiently than one would have been able to do before the computer. So I have nothing whatsoever but wonder and amazement and gratitude for the existence of the computer, despite my early resistance, which was, I think, probably serious but brief. No, I probably didn't resist the computer too long.
Yeah. Well, listen, we have a few minutes left. Talk a little bit about what you see as the great challenges facing the antiquarian book trade as we proceed into the future.
Well, the antiquarian book trade is made up of individuals and has always been made up of individuals and always will be made up of individuals. It's the will of a single individual to perpetuate or to take over or to initiate a bookstore. In this country, we don't have second, third, and fourth generation book dealers to speak of. So each new bookstore is dependent upon the existence of someone who has imposed his will upon the situation. A lot of people bemoan the passing or seeming passing of Serendipity, and I say, well, it's absurd. There was nobody there before Serendipity, and there'll be nobody there after Serendipity, but the books will still be there. And all that's required is someone to administer the books. And I have very little doubt that will happen. I think it will happen. I don't know how. I don't know under what capital basis it will happen. If nobody wishes to pony up any particular money to buy a particular entity, then they'll all go piecemeal to auctions or friends and get redistributed in the way that books move around. The book, my best friend at the time, Bill Hoffer, really encapsulated it in the most succinct form ever created. That is to say, booksellers solve problems caused by books. Now, I have 500,000 items. Those are 500,000 problems. That is to say, what to do with them, the books. And I believe that the book trade will solve those problems without any trouble whatsoever. And the economic basis under which it happens will be dependent upon either my choice of advisors or their good fate or the state of the world or whether there's another political revolution or the stock market or all those intangibles over which we have no control, individual control. So I have never had any worry or doubt about the future of the book business. The book business is itself, by definition, a state of change. John Van Coen was the first to quote libraries books they didn't have in their card catalog in 1939, and yet this is something so routine that we all think we've all been doing this forever. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't been going on forever. It has not been going on for 100 years. When China starts to buy books seriously, not just Chinese items printed in China that happen to be in the West, but things that they need that they don't have, well, there's a huge new market. Just as we had briefly Australia or Canada or Japan, which lasted somewhat longer. Mm. Suddenly new markets emerging. India will certainly emerge. Russia will certainly emerge. And China will emerge. And these are huge markets. So I'm not a market analyst, and I'm not worried about it. I'm obvious. I've been to two of the Hong Kong book fair. I went to the first Hong Kong book fair and saw the awakenings were obvious. One needs much more importantly to understand one's own financial structure and to work within it. I don't have a lot of patience or time, and I certainly have no admiration for the dealer who wishes to push his finances beyond their natural limits, or to pyramid, or to leverage, or actually to use other people's money to have their will, unless it's money they're responsible for, like a line of credit. Very few booksellers have lines of credit of significance, astonishingly enough, and even fewer booksellers understand, I think, the concept of how much the books that they sold in the last fiscal year actually cost them. These are such basic accounting and fiscal concepts that I used to teach money in the book business at the Colorado School, and it certainly needs to be taught still about what the financial structure of the antiquarian book business is and implies, and how a bookseller can take advantage of it, of some accounting knowledge. But I'm certainly not concerned about the future of the book business, not concerned about the influence of the Kindle or other mechanical book readers. those people who treat books as information only, that's been going on in the university library. Half the librarians are totally dedicated to service information services, which is the content of the book only. But the book, of course, is vastly more than a vehicle of content only. It's a work of art in itself, and it makes possible the discussion of typography, binding, marks in books, revision, problems in printing, cultural differences, and an endless number of subjects, many of which are becoming new academic subjects even now.
Well, this is a good point to stop. We've had 30 minutes. It's the quickest 30 minutes we've had in a long time. I appreciate you spending some time with us, Peter, and good luck and God bless.
Okay.